For a moment, I would like you all to imagine that you are students again. And today, I'm going to be your teacher. You walk into my classroom, and let me set the scene for you for a moment. In the front of my classroom, I've got rows of, that doesn't happen in the classroom. Ignore that. In the front of the room, there are rows of desks just like every other classroom. In the back, I've got lab tables filled with ungodly amounts of glassware, weights, scales, solutions, everything you could need in a high school chemistry lab. Walk to my class and I say, "Good morning, students. My name is Mr. Maassen, and I'm going to be your teacher today." If you look behind you, you'll see there's a blue solution sitting on one of the tables. Today, you're going to find out what and how much metal is in that solution. Let me give you some tips. If you're 0.2 of a gram off the right answer, I fail you. You get 100 points or 0 points. If you have any questions, look them up, because I'm not going to answer them. I'm going to go sit at my desk, check my email, and poke fun at you. So this is a little flustering. And I know it was for me when I walked into this exact same situation in my high school chemistry class. Let me talk about me for a second. I'm not a steel trap. I wish I could say I was, and I wish every student was, because it'd make teaching and learning a lot easier. I can't spit back every formula, equation, date, time, and idea that comes my way during the average school year. That'd be awesome, but I can't. I can't imagine how any student today could. The sheer amount of information that is thrown at the average high school student is incredible. And for anybody to be able to retain all of it, that's a miracle. Now, when I talk about the sheer vastness of information, I'd like to give you an example. If you're in Mrs. Browder's AP European History class, or as I like to call it, my own personal hell, you begin to realize how much information is really out there. Now, I call it my own personal hell because on a good day, I can't remember what I had for breakfast in the morning, much less 400 years of European history. Okay, a little ridiculous, right? I knew from the beginning this class was going to be a struggle for me. I mean, in the middle of the summer, I get smacked in the face with a booklet, a 30-page booklet on medieval history. She tells me, "You better know this front and back because we're going to test you on it the first day back in school." What? Excuse me? And so I knew from the beginning this was going to be a struggle. It's going to be a hard class for me. So 3/4 of the way through the year, I'm scraping by on the test, and I've developed the system. The system is retain as much as I can on a chapter, get tested over it, and then throw all that away. Okay, I don't need it, all right? You gotta make room for those new set of lectures, new set of presentations, whatever. But Mrs. Browder had this way of looming the AP test over our heads. The way she did it was, every day we walked in, she told us, "Hey, you have an AP test at the end of this." Okay, great. So that's when I kind of realized, okay, I'm getting all this material, I'm memorizing all this material for the test, but am I really retaining any of it? The answer was no. Okay, I started panicking. Thought to myself, I'm going to fail the AP test, I'm going to fail this class, I'm going to become a fry cook for the rest of my life. That was going to be the end of it. And so I walked in one day, it seemed like a pretty normal day, but I noticed something a little weird. On the board, Mrs. Browder had placed a picture of Vladimir Putin on the board. We'd been studying the Cold War at the time, mind you. And I don't know a lot about the Cold War, but I know Vladimir Putin had little to nothing to do with it. And so she went into this long lecture about modern-day Russia, its current state of affairs, political issues in the United States, stuff like this, and I was a little angry. I mean, we had this AP test coming up in a month and a half, and she was sitting up here talking about modern-day politics and issues. And before I could question her motives, she put up a picture of Nikita Khrushchev, Soviet leader during the Cuban Missile Crisis. She went into another lecture about the same deal, Russia's issues, the political identity that Nikita Khrushchev took during the Cold War, and I noticed something. Yes, the dates, the times, the people, they were different, but the concepts and ideals, they were exactly the same. There was a connection there. Yes, it was two different people at two different times, but she soon taught me that history was doomed to repeat itself, and it was. And that's when I made that connection. For the first time, it really clicked for me. I didn't have to take time. I didn't have to go home that night and pore over my notes to memorize the material because it was all in my head already. I was surrounded by it. Now, I'm pretty aware of what's going on politically. I'd like to think so anyways. And it just made that connection for me because I can look around, I can look at modern day Russia and say, oh, that's because of this or this or this. It's pretty great. So 3/4 of the way through the year, let me summarize. I now understand how to learn history. This is great. But I kind of made this realization that what if I could do this for all of my other classes? And unfortunately, I can't really connect modern-day Russia to the biology of a fruit fly. Now, you might be able to, but I can't. So let me jump back to my chemistry nightmare, having in mind that connections are what made the difference for me. And I had this in my mind during the time. So let me give you a little more background. Mr. Dugan, my teacher at the time, he had something called early lab. This is where you come in 30, 35 minutes before school actually starts to do the lab. That's all the time you get for that lab. And if you don't get it done in that time, you're SOL. So I come in that morning, and I'm faced with this situation, and I'm going, okay, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I know I have 30 minutes to do it. So this is pretty great. And so I'm looking around at my classmates, kind of freaking out a little bit, and I see something a little peculiar. I see a girl standing there with a bottle of chemicals. And a boy walks up to her and says, hey, can I use those chemicals? I'll give them right back when I'm done. And she doesn't even notice him. She doesn't pay any attention to him. She's just as stressed out as I am. Then I watch a second girl walk up to her and just rip the chemicals out of her hand and walk away. Now, this isn't the nicest way to get what you want, but it worked. She had the chemicals. And this made another connection for me. Now, I realized when dealing with a solution with a metal in it, if I just put a more violent non-metal into the solution, the metal would come out, and I could weigh it and analyze it. Now, this is great, and it was great that I made this connection. But unfortunately, I already knew this. This was something my first-year chemistry teacher had tried to pound into my head time and time again during my first year. Why didn't I get it then? And I soon realized it was because I didn't have a connection to the material then. I didn't make that personal connection to the material. Now, this may seem like a stretch for some of you to say, oh, how is he making these connections? It doesn't matter. Don't worry about it. It's me personally. I'm making these connections, and that's what made it easier on me. Now, I wish I could stand up here and tell you that I'm this self-motivated learner that has this ability to instantly make these connections and I'm your star student. I'm not. Okay, for 12 years now, I've been the slacker of the class. I'm the kid that it just clicks for me. I can memorize stuff quickly. I've got a little bit of a photographic memory. It makes things pretty easy. I mean, I can look at the material 5 minutes before the test and ace it. No big deal. All my other friends hated me during the time. And so I hit this roadblock my junior year. I found a class that there were no easy answers. Let me talk about AP English Language with Mrs. Wilhelmus, the teacher that just introduced me. On paper, this class was really easy, okay? And this surprised me. This was my first AP class, and it was the easiest class in my whole schedule. And movable deadlines, little to no outside work, I mean, this was gonna be my slacker class. I didn't have to do anything in this class. I mean, an hour every class was just us talking about our opinions about whatever. It didn't really matter. So, and I started to get really apathetic. I mean, it was the running joke with me and my friends that we weren't gonna do anything today. It was mostly true. And so, no offense to her, but then something happened in AP English Language, and it soon became the hardest class in my schedule. Now, I talked about before that we had discussions every class. Well, mostly these discussions were Mrs. Wilhelmus asking us our personal opinions on something we've read, political ideals, whatever. And this was easy. I love to talk about myself, talk about my opinions. I'm pretty important. It's pretty great. But there was one class where we read a little paragraph about lifeboat ethics, the ethics of overpopulation. And when she asked for my opinion on it, I was completely lost. It wasn't that I didn't understand the question or didn't understand the material. It was that I couldn't form my own opinion about it. There was too much logistics that went into it. And for the first time, there wasn't an easy answer to this question. And this really bothered me. It ate at me. Because like I said, I've been a slacker for 12 years. Why was there no easy answer to this? And there was no grade behind it either, so why should it matter? Well, I started talking to Mrs. Wilhelmus after class and after school. We started discussing things like philosophy, religion, whatever, and I left with more questions than answers. And this really bothered me. But then I had realized something. I had realized that the assignments and the grades and what Mrs. Wilhelmus put us through, it wasn't to get us to pass the class. Well, I mean, obviously, but it wasn't to get us to pass the class. It wasn't to get us higher scores on our AP exam. It was to teach us about ourselves, not as individuals, but as learners, as students. It wasn't about teaching rhetorical analysis or synthesis essays. It was about teaching us how to learn and how to connect with the material. Those connections that I made in chemistry and AP European history, they came from this class. Because for the first time, I had a class that taught me how to learn. 12 years a student, and I had not had a single class that showed me how to be a learner, how to be a student. I was simply thrown in and expected to memorize this material. I didn't know how to connect to it. I didn't know how to retain this material and apply it to other concepts. Mrs. Wilhelmus taught me that. And yes, the grades were non-existent, and the class didn't seem that important on paper, but it soon became my favorite class. I got to walk in every day and learn something about myself, something I didn't already know. I learned how to be a learner, how to be a student, how to be a scholar, how to ask questions, how to get answers you're content with, even though they may not be the right ones. So let me generalize for a second. With Mrs. Wilhelmus, the assignments were a medium to teach me about myself. Great. With Mr. Dugan, he had this way of just tearing you down, ripping you apart, but he was just as eager to build you back up. He has this reputation in our school for being a little cruel, for being a little vulgar. But he had this way of, some of you know him, but he had this way of making us better students by showing us our flaws and showing us our mistakes. He would make us go up to the board and do nearly impossible problems that we would have no background for and then laugh at us. But we got it. He built us back up after that. He taught us our mistakes, and he made sure we never made them again. With Mrs. Browder, yes, she threw all this information at us. She expected us to learn all of it and made us do most of the work outside of school, but she gave every minute of her free time in and out of class to counsel us, to make our DBQs better, to help us better understand the material. Now, I've talked a lot about connections, I've talked a lot about understanding the material, but what I want you guys to take away from this is it wasn't the material that was important to me this year for the first time. Now, coming from a fairly strict household, this is weird for me to say. I was never greeted with a, hey, how was your day? Or, hey, how was school today? It's always, why are your grades so low? Why'd you get a B on this? Why are you not getting a 4.0? So grades were always important to me. It was important to my family. And so to have a school year where the material was no longer important, well, let me take a step back. It was still important. But for me to be the important one, this was great. To be able to understand how to be a scholar, a student, and a learner, this was also great. I knew that maybe I don't need to know Fibonacci sequence or the Cold War ethics or whatever later on in my life, but I will always need to learn. I will always need to continue to understand my world and understand myself to be successful. Now, I'm not asking you guys today as teachers to sit around your classroom and sing Kumbaya, make connections with your students. I understand you guys don't have time for that, and maybe your students don't either. But what I want you guys to realize today, don't measure your success as teachers by the standards the state puts out for you, by the test scores of your students, by the parent satisfaction with your class. Measure your success as teachers today by your ability to make a student understand themselves as learners, understand themselves as scholars. Make your students ask those questions. Challenge mediums. Make your students more aware of themselves. And the material, the test scores, that will all come later. Thank you very much.